was almost like a little flick of a switch. It was just watching this guy score against Manchester United, the David Beckhams and the Roy Keanes and the Ryan Giggs, etc. And I just remember sitting watching him thinking, going, well, if he can do that, then so can I. I think most people realise it's probably the most competitive and possibly the most ruthless industry on the planet. I've been there, seen and done it, and I've studied at the highest level, so let me come and share what I know about that I've learned over the last 30 years. What's their communication skills like? What's their empathy like? What's their emotional talent? All of these things that you get from being around the best of the best in your field. Even though it's Microsoft, even though it's like the biggest company in the world, I would have had to turn around and tell them no. So I think that's probably the biggest thing that I've learned over the last few years is...
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Sales Cadence podcast. I'm your host, Matt Sykes. Absolute pleasure to have you aboard. Joining me on the show today is Paul McVeigh. Paul's a friend of the show. He actually joined me 5.5 years ago, believe it or not, on episode number 3 back in the day. Paul's an ex-Premier League football player, but one with a difference. 300 appearances for teams like Spurs, Luton Town, Burnley and Norwich City, 40 full international caps for Northern Ireland. But a bit of a difference because after his playing career finished, he went out and got himself a master's degree in psychology. And that's what's fascinating about Paul, because 5.5 years ago we had him on the podcast. He was talking about the work that he was doing inside the world of sports psychology. So he's still working within football at Crystal Palace as the performance psychologist, but he was also combining that with corporate training, which centered around mindset and attitude in the corporate world. And I can remember him saying 5 years ago on the podcast that he had a plan really to focus more on keynote speaking. And so I decided to invite him back to share with me how things are going. And let's just say things have progressed at quite a pace. 5 years on, Paul is now focusing all of his time on keynote speaking. He delivers talks to rooms full of thousands of people for clients such as Microsoft, Accenture, KPMG, John Lewis and the BBC, and many, many more. He's also set up a very unique leadership program as well. He's bringing together world-class speakers, trainers and coaches to provide elite programs for blue-chip organizations. On this podcast, we talk about why Paul has such a passion for sharing his story on the stage. Typically, Paul, because of the guy that he is, he opens up about the occasional talk that didn't quite land and how he understood how to deal with that. He talks about his battles back in the early days of imposter syndrome. It's a really, really interesting podcast. I would invite you to go back and listen to episode 3 first if you wish. So if you're one of those kind of people who's interested in understanding what it takes to be a professional keynote speaker, then this podcast is definitely for you. And if you like what you hear at the end of the podcast, do me a favor, go and share the episode with somebody, maybe give it a like or a share. Ladies and gentlemen, without further ado, friend of the show, Paul McVeigh. Welcome to the Sales Cadence podcast.
How are you doing, my friend?
I'm very well. Long time no speak. It was almost 5.5 years since you came on episode number 3. We're now at episode 58, I think. There's a bit of water gone under the bridge, Macca, since we last spoke.
For both of us in careers, in business, in life, in economies coming and going, and yeah, but still 58 episodes is still a lot of podcasts, so congratulations.
Well, thanks for that, but more importantly, let's not talk about me, let's talk about you. That's what this episode's all about. And Paul, what I want it to be about is the evolution, if you like, of what's happened to you over those last 5.5 years, because I can remember sitting in actually when you used to live down in Norfolk, and I know you've moved since then, but I remember sitting in your kitchen dining area, and we were chatting on that episode about what was going on in your life at that time. And if I sort of remind you very briefly, obviously you'd come out of professional football at that time, but you were still working. I think you were working at Crystal Palace at the time as the psychologist there. You just finished your master's degree in psychology. You were involved in leadership training of sorts, and you were just starting to dabble in this thing called keynote speaking. So if I pause my conversation there and I hand the baton to you and go, 5.5 years later, what's going on in the world of Paul McVeigh? Give me 60 seconds.
Oh, good tee up there. 60 seconds is just incredibly difficult to do. I'm Irish. You know, I'm a keynote speaker. I get paid to speak for a living. You want me to try and sum it up in 60 seconds? It's virtually impossible, Matt. I don't know why you do this to me. Uh, I'll try and do it. And essentially, it's gone from being something that I did with other roles in my life, like being a sports psychologist, like working in the media, to now it is my single focus in my entire career. And it's accelerated and launched it now. I'm doing everything from speaking to 700 people in Las Vegas last month to I've spoke 3 times in Saudi Arabia and Oman over the last couple of months as well. So it just kind of has gone to a completely different level and just doing it around the world for the biggest company. So I'm just feel simply blessed.
And so all of those other skills that you've created for yourself, you've built for yourself outside of football that were going on back in the day then, you've sort of paused those and you're just single-minded now on keynote speaking, right?
I think it was one of the decisions I had when I needed to. It was like a crossroads in 2017. So when I'd finished football, one of the things that really appealed while we were working together, I was doing some speaking, I was doing some leadership training, I was doing some media, I was working in Premier League clubs, and I just loved the variety. But when you did something for 20 years, it's like coming out of the military probably, or if you've, I don't know, worked in civil service for 20 years or worked in a bank for 20, it's just doing the same thing repeatedly for a long time. Of course, I loved it because it's professional football, and that in itself was a blessing to get paid to do what you love. But I also didn't have much flexibility and freedom. I didn't decide my next day off. I didn't decide when my holidays were. I didn't decide all of the time frames within that industry.
Yeah.
So to have the variety of doing whatever I wanted across lots of different areas, I loved it. But I think from a business, more an entrepreneurial point of view, I thought I was spreading myself too thin because did people think that I was the person that helped, professional athletes? Did they think I was the guy on TV or radio? Or did they see me speaking at a conference? And I thought it was a little bit too vague in terms of, I know your main goal, your USP is it's all about selling. It's all
Yeah.
about what is your USP? What are you going to try and offer to your clients to give them value? And I think it was just too broad for people to go, we need a speaker, let's speak to Paul. And that was I suppose the goal is I wanted people to have me at the top of their minds when they're organizing a conference, when they're, doing an away day, an all hands, and a virtual event, whatever it was. And if they wanted someone with a sporting background who loves psychology and loves mindset, I wanted people to be thinking about me.
So how did you transition then from, back 5 years ago when we last spoke on the podcast? You obviously, like every business, Paul, has to do, they go through those sort of hard yards, those first 12, 18, 24 months, if you like, of building a pipeline, building lead gen, coming up with some kind of marketing. Walk me through, if you can, very, very briefly. What was those? What was it like? Did the phone start ringing from day one when they knew you were available, or did you have to work at it a little bit harder than that?
I think it's really interesting because I feel like I had some credibility of playing professional football, but just didn't have the experience of how to run a business. And I think the biggest thing now is that I have a team of people that work for me, with me, whatever phrase you want to use. But we're working together on this every single day. So what I did for the first 7 years was it was me. I was doing socials, I was doing marketing, I was doing accountancy, I was doing all of the administration you need for a business. And now we have a team of people where we have so many aspects to the business of what we do, to just behind the scenes of me stepping up on stage and going and delivering a session in Las Vegas or in Saudi Arabia, because there's so many other elements to what we need to do to get to that point of being able to get paid to go and speak on stage. But I think that's also the evolution that you come to. At some stage you can have to get yourself out of the cycle of, as you're building up the lead gen and the funnel's kind of growing, and then you start delivering. And as you start delivering, the funnel's dropping away because there's no one there to carry it on. And it's really tough. Like it's probably the most challenging thing an entrepreneur can do, to go from themselves to 2 people, 4 people, 8 people, whatever it is that you're trying to do, until eventually you have a fully sustainable business. And that's the journey that we're on now. So now the fact that I'm paying out all these wages every month, and the fact that I'm trying to do this on a global scale, really does challenge me of what I need to bring into the business. And of course we'll talk about how that's evolved in and of itself. But yeah, so it used to be me as a speaker, and now it's me with 3 businesses, all doing different elements across different variety of leadership training.
So, what is it about keynote speaking that really gets you going?
Oh, it's just the best. Like, I'll use the example that, if anyone's ever heard me talking about me as a speaker, or especially me as a footballer to start off with, whenever I was 16, I got walked in the White Hart Lane, and my first contract was, say, £26 a week, I think it was, in the youth team at the time as an apprenticeship. But of course, my boss was Alan Sugar. So Sir Alan Sugar from The Apprentice. So whenever I'm, walking into reception every day, I used to see his roller with, his number plate AMS1,
Yeah,
and I'm seeing this guy, who's my boss. And then of course you get from playing in the youth team for a couple of years to then you get your first pro contract on a crazy £11,000 a year. It was like £200 a week. So I was the lowest paid player at the club. But even that, from £20 a week to £200 a week, was obviously 10 times improvement. I was delighted. But then, of course, I made my Premier League debut that season, and to be able to go from £200 a week to suddenly a 6-figure contract in your first year, to then Alan Sugar going, "Can we pay you some more to come and play for us?" And I'm like, "Yes, please, that sounds fun." But of course, it didn't work out. It Spurs did after a few appearances, and came up to the lovely place, club, amazing people of Norwich City, and of course owned by one of the most amazing women I've ever met, in Delia Smith. And Delia said, "Paul, can we pay you some money to play football for us?" So this happened for 8 years at Norwich City. Then you go away, then you come back, and she paid me some more, until eventually after 20 years, I was getting paid to play football. And then for the last 15 years as a keynote speaker, I have people pay me to talk about kicking a ball around with my friends. So
it's a
it's
tough
like,
life, huh?
what's not to love, man? It's as my mum says, when am I going to get a real job? And I actually think, well, I've got the 46 and it hasn't really happened to this point, so I'm going to carry on.
What I know from your work and the way that you speak to audiences and rooms and large corporates is you've got this skill of being able to blend that past professional football career with the modern world of business, right?
Yeah, well, there's no point in talking about, what it's like to play in the Premier League or international, or play against these great players. And they might be nice for stories down the pub with, some friends or family. But if I'm going into a business setting with business leaders, generally the most senior business leaders in the organization, all they're interested in is what can they take away.
Yeah.
And it's not the story of that you played against these guys in the different stadia around the world. It's what was the lesson in what you did there. And so for me, the way that I try and translate it, and especially engage audiences, because again, very, very fortunate that I played a sport that's the number one sport in the country, number one sport in the world. So because you can touch on that at the start, people generally engage straight away. Now, whether that's showing a little video of scoring a few goals, whether it's putting up a photograph of playing against a certain player that people recognize, it's almost just getting that credibility, because people automatically are thinking, wow, for me to have done that, I think most people realize it's probably the most competitive and possibly the most ruthless industry on the planet. And just to qualify that, that's me saying that because it wasn't just people like me growing up in Belfast who wanted to be professional footballers. There was thousands, tens, hundreds of thousands of kids around the UK doing it. But of course, it's not just around the UK, it's around the world. So you're talking about the millions and millions and millions of kids who wanted to do what I did. And to get to that level of playing in the Premier League and international football, you're into a 0.00001% of the population who actually wanted to do it, and we ended up doing it. So that's why I'm talking about that competitiveness. But when you then have that as the credibility factor, it's then, well, okay, what can you then talk about? And for me, I try and stay within my lane. There's loads of things that potentially I could have talked about over the years, but the 3 things that really I feel I'm most passionate about, and I'm probably the best person to speak on, is performance, leadership, and teamwork. And I think with those categories, those they're big subjects, even in and of themselves, they're huge subjects. So I actually come from a specific angle, and I want to talk about. Well, it's not just about performance, because performance is so vast and so varied. So what about the psychology of a performer? What's the psychology of performance? So that's the angle that I feel like I'm best qualified to talk about, because to play in the Premier League, you have that experiential learning, that tacit knowledge of being there, seen and done it. But then to go and get your master's in psychology, to understand the framework, the tenets of what's important, the research, what the academics are being saying, that for me gives me the best opportunity to have this little niche in the middle of being able to go, I've been there, seen and done it, and I've studied at the highest level. So let me come and share what I know about I've learned over the last 30 years. But that's performance. You talked about, leadership. Same thing. Leadership is so broad, isn't it? So huge to the subject. So I actually say, well, what's the psychology of a leader need to be? And I think probably one of the biggest things that most people who are listening to this will be probably have experienced themselves, or if they haven't experienced it, they've known someone probably pretty close who has, and that's around imposter syndrome.
Yeah,
It's really amazing, isn't it, how many leaders, even when they get to such a really senior level, still don't necessarily have that full confidence and belief that they're capable and they should be doing their job. And then sadly, it's even worse in women. I've spoken to so many senior leaders over the years, and men probably have a slightly, and this is obviously generalization, but men
sure.
probably have a slightly higher self confidence or belief, or whatever it is that they think they can do it, versus women. So again, that's a huge aspect of the leadership side.
And are you seeing that more and more? Is that a trend that's increasing, that sort of
Definitely,
imposter syndrome? And what's
definitely.
driving that, Paul?
It's a good question. I think it comes back to, again, to our beliefs. I
Yeah.
think I'm so conscious of it and so aware of it because I had such a huge issue with it myself. And so I
Mm.
remember whenever I came over as a 16-year-old kid, you know, I mentioned walking into White Hart Lane, Tottenham Hotspur in North London as a 16-year-old kid. And my first day was with Jurgen Klinsmann, who I'm sure I've told you that story. But it's the
Yeah.
fact that because I saw this guy who was a world class performer. So when I talk about performance, I'm so blessed and grateful that my first day, in the first day of my full time career, I was working with and being around world class performers. So when I go in to share anything, any kind of session, whether it's a 1 hour keynote, whether it's a year long leadership program, I'm coming from a place of how good do you want to be? Because if you want to be the best of the best, that's what world class performance is. But have you ever been exposed to what world class performers do, how they think, how they react? And we have a simple analogy I use. It's a bit like, a graduate coming out of university and getting on the, I don't know, KPMG graduate program. And it's like them walking in on their first day in, I don't know, say Canary Wharf in London, and they walk straight into the first floor, straight to the back wall, in the lift, right up to the top floor, walk into the boardroom, and just sit and observe and be around board members for 30 years. How do they strategize? What's their communication skills like? What's their empathy like? What's their emotional talent? All of these things that you get from being around the best of the best in your field. And I got that from day one. Only way that my brain works is how do you be the best? How do you improve every single day towards what you want to be?
I think we touched on this on the first podcast, but it's really good just to go over it again, Paul, because what you just said there is it takes a special kind of individual to be able to recognise that you're amongst champions, shall we say. What happened in the head of Paul McVeigh at such a younger age to go, hang on a second, I can learn some stuff here?
Well, I didn't have that fact, or I didn't have that thought. What I thought was, what am I doing here? There's no way I deserve to be here. I should be getting
Okay.
the hell out of here. Which again comes back to the imposter syndrome. And I
Yeah.
think this is why it's so fascinating, because it wasn't like someone was telling me. Someone wasn't coming up to me in training or in the changing room or at any stage in my first couple of years of my career and going, Paul, you're not good enough to be here. Actually,
Mm.
you don't really deserve to be here. But in my head, just because I had this Irish accent, just because I probably wore slightly different clothes, the London lads who were coming in their Armani jeans and, I don't know, Versace shirts or whatever it was, I just was building up this story. And of course, we
Mm.
know about beliefs and the power of beliefs and just how important they are for pretty much every aspect of our lives, because they drive everything, every single thing we do. And yet, in my head, I was creating this unbelievably limiting, but also really, really destructive belief about what I thought I was capable of.
It's interesting, isn't it? Because it's almost as if people are creating their own kind of movie, aren't they? And then they're going back and they're playing it on demand. I remember someone saying that once on a podcast, and I thought that really sticks with me. So, is there one thing that you could share with someone who's listening to this thing? Imposter syndrome, that's me. Is there? How do you get yourself out of that funk?
Yeah, I think my it was almost like a stroke of luck that I had a friend of a friend at the time actually gave me a book by a guy who will know of well. I'm sure lots of people will know is Tony Robbins, so big
Okay.
personal development guru in America. So the fact that I read a book at 17 on personal development and completely highlighted what role I was playing in this inferiority complex and imposter syndrome of myself. And so by reading that book, it simply challenged the beliefs that were holding me back. So that was a really, really, I think fortunate piece of luck that my friend said you should read this. I did, and then I started to plan it. And I think the next part of this was again, it's not something that you can plan for, and I
Mm.
probably wouldn't be able to say to people this is what you need to go and do. But what happened with me is one of my peers, one of my teammates at the time in the youth team, because we had kind of I just about to held onto their coattails and just managed to get into the professional ranks. But to see my friend Rory Allen, who was our best player at the time, but still he was on my team, so I didn't think he was exceptional that far above me. But to see him make his debut and score against that fantastic Manchester United team of the late 90s, to see my friend score the goal, and for me to observe this, and just it was almost like a little flick of a switch. It was just watching this guy score against Manchester United, the David Beckhams and the Roy Keanes and the Ryan Giggs, etc. And I just remember sitting watching them thinking, going, well, if he can do that, then so can I. But that was down to me taking the lesson from an experience that I'd had, as opposed to trying to almost construct that experience and trying to generate it in a way to help me break through.
So you almost need that social proof. You need that evidence that says it's happening. So therefore, if it's happening, so it's a bit like some of the clients I work with who, when we first get together, there's some apprehension about some sales trainer coming into their world, and all of the things that you would expect people to be not fearful, but certainly aware of about someone new coming into their environment. And sometimes you do hear sort of feedback. Well, the market's really tough at the moment, and the economy's not great, and there's a lot of competition out there. And these are all very relevant things, Paul. But someone's buying. Someone's buying what you sell today. So I'm afraid I'm not going to accept that as your first response for too long before we get into the reasons why I'm going to back that
Yeah.
up. But
Tell me,
it's a very common trait. Huh?
completely. I actually had a text message from a really senior partner from one of the big four firms, who I'm sure you know, the big four accountancy firms.
Yeah.
I had a text from him today, and it was just like, yeah, it'd be great to see you, catch up in London, blah, blah, blah. FYI, it's been a really tough year. Just want to manage your expectations. And I'm like, I think between the four of you, are kind of doing pretty well around the world. So, yeah, let's have that conversation and see.
Love it, love it. So I did say at the start of the podcast, I want to focus on Keynote. So
Yeah,
I've always aspired to be some kind of keynote speaker, Paul. Right,
yeah,
and I watch you and I see your progress, and I think, wow, I'm going there. That's where I'm going. And of course, there's going to be a whole load of things that someone like me who aspires to be a better speaker needs to do. And so, what better person to ask than yourself? So, first question first. A client gets in touch. Let's use one of the top four accountancy firms you just mentioned, and they say, Paul, we'd like to come along and kick off our quarter three. You've got 45 minutes. Over to you. Is it over to you, or are there some things that you effectively, some sort of process that you go through before you get to the point of standing on a stage?
yeah. Of course. Well, listen, it's hopefully this won't timestamp the episode, but I just had a conversation today with Microsoft, and they've just booked me to speak next month. So this is the perfect example. Everything you have said, this is what we're going to go through. So the conversation was they were interested in me. Fortunately, I've spoken for them before, a number of years ago. So in a different department, so they actually spoke for 200 people across Southeast Asia. But again, that was virtual. The sort of the joys of doing it virtually. You have a massive reach, but didn't have the personal interaction. This time, it's going to be in London with 50 of their senior leaders. So he's coming to me, and what he's looking at, Matt, is he's looking at my profile and thinking, do we want someone like him? Is he going to have enough credibility to walk into a senior leadership team in Microsoft and be able to engage them, because that's probably the first part. How do you
Sure.
engage a really, really senior, successful group of people? The second part is, what am I actually going to deliver? What is going to deliver from what I like to talk about that's going to fit with their agenda? So again, we've found out that they want to really talk about between leadership and teamwork. So whenever I was starting to give a little bit of my background, the overview, I said, I think really my 3 points are performance, leadership, and teamwork. And they said, well, I think we need to put performance out of the way because we've just had that. Should be more around leadership of how do we continue to improve, or how to become a better team. So I'm then saying, right, okay, this is what I think I do on leadership. This is what I would suggest we do on teamwork. Then we'll go back and forth between what they want. Of course, they have their agenda, they have their outcomes and their objectives, and then we will match somewhere in the middle. But what's really interesting, Matt, what I'm not going to do is they might turn around going, okay, can you come in and talk to us about management styles or communication? Even though it's Microsoft, even though it's like the biggest company in the world, I would have to turn around and tell them no. So I think that's probably the biggest thing that I've learned over the last few years is know your subject matter, be the authority. I know there's nobody else in the world who can speak on this subject the way I can. Because of that USP I have, no one else in the world has done that. So I know I'm really, really confident that I know I can deliver that. But if that's not what they want, they need to go and find someone else who is an authority on management styles or communication, because that's not what I talk about.
Well, kudos to you for that. And I'm sure there are people out there that probably wouldn't do what you've done. But I certainly subscribe to that way of behaving. Have you in the past then had to do that? And if you had, how did you just basically said, listen, I'm the wrong guy, or is that
I
how the
think
conversation goes?
I think you just end up. It's almost like it's almost like going on a date whenever you have these like discovery calls, because you're kind of thinking, they're thinking, is this person the right person for us? And I'm sitting thinking, am I able to deliver for them what they need? And unless there is a really good fit, the last thing I'd want is to go on stage in front of whatever amount of people, and some of the most successful people in the organization, and not blow them away, and
Yeah,
not
exactly.
smash it out of the park. That would be a disaster for my case.
Absolutely. No one wins in that one, do they?
No one wins. So again, it's always the way that I try and do this. I want to come away from any call, whether it's a sales call, whether it's a debrief call, whether it's a feedback, whatever we're talking about. I want them to come away and going, this is going to be a win-win-win. I'm going to get a win because I'm getting more business coming to me. The client who books me is going to get the win because they're going to look really good because they've brought someone like me in. And everybody that's in the room that I'm speaking to, I want them to walk away going, wow, that was brilliant. I love that. He was really funny, or he was really good. Whatever it is they take, or if there's one thing they take away. And generally, most people only can take one or two things away based on their stage of life, where they're at, what they've seen, what they know, etc. But that's ultimately, I want that win-win-win. How do we all come away going, great to work together, folks. Hope we can do it again soon.
So then you've had this conversation with a client, you've gone backwards and forwards, you get as close as you can get to what they're looking for, and the day arrives. Is there a process, Paul, that you adopt? Those, I don't know, let's call it, you land in, you mentioned you're over in the Middle East, right? So you land in the Middle East. 24 hours before the talk itself, is there anything that you do? Is there some kind of systematic way that you look at this talk before you actually stand up on the stage the following day?
Can I give a football analogy? Knowing
Of
that
course.
that's my background, but also I know you're a big football fan. I think it's about, for me to walk out onto a pitch and play in a game at whatever level, whether it's international, Premier League, Championship, whatever level you're playing at. For me, just to walk out onto that field of play, I have had to do so much work in the background, and I'm talking years and years and years of training, discipline, building my knowledge, understanding, technical, all of that stuff. But if you, that's for the almost the career up to that point. But for the actual week leading up to the point, the minimal amount of training will still allow me to go out onto a field of play on a Saturday and still go and deliver my best. Because I think whenever you've done something like this for so long, like
Yeah.
I have, it's about finding the right fit for what I'm going to say. And then because, again, I feel I'm so confident whenever I walk onto a stage that I know that no one else in the room has done what I've done. And if I share it with enough passion and enough enthusiasm, enough way to engage the audience and bring them on that journey with me, I know that that's what I need to do. So it's like almost doing the warm up. Whatever I did in the warm up probably doesn't make that much difference as soon as the first whistle goes, and then I go and deliver the performance of being the best player on the field or being the worst. And of course, it still happens. Like I'll still walk off stage sometimes and come away and go, didn't feel like I quite nailed it there. But I'm not coming off going, that was a 4 out of 10. It was terrible. But I could be going off going, that was a 7 or 8, as opposed to sometimes come away going, that was absolutely brilliant and I loved it.
Do you ever rehearse in your mind the week before, just going over and over and over, or is it just so nailed now that you just can go anywhere you want?
Yeah,
It's
I think it's just whenever you become so, what's the word? Whether it's
unconsciously
just,
competent is the phrase, isn't it?
yeah, but I was thinking like, is it mastery? Is it confidence? Obviously, uncompetent or sorry, unconscious competence. There's just all the different ways that you can describe it. I'm not sure what it is. I think the simple phrase you hear from America is if you've done enough reps, by the
Yeah,
time you get to what you need to do, then you're there. And I think that confidence then gives you the ability to then go, I'm just going to go off on tangent here. I'm just going to go off pace and try this, or I'm going to throw in a new joke that I haven't really done before. And, and again, it's all part of the process of being a professional speaker. My first ever speech to Aviva in 2010, I literally had 30 pages of a written out speech that I had remembered and recalled and recited so many times before I walked on stage that time in Aviva. And it probably took about 3 or 4 years of constantly doing that and learning it so much until maybe that 30-page speech came down to 10 pages of bullet points, until the 10 pages of bullet points became down to a 1 page of 10 bullet points, until eventually now I'll go on with no notes, no nothing. But it's because I know the subject, I know
yeah.
my subject, I know what I'm talking about. And whenever you have that level of whether it's knowledge, expertise, experience, whatever it is, I think that's where I know what I need to say. I know how I need to hit the main points across. It's almost like a singer, the different parts of the song that you need to get across and really nail. And that's the exact same as whenever you're speaking.
It's a bit like I messaged you on WhatsApp a couple of weeks ago and said it's been a while, and then you booked a slot and we turned up. We got the tech right for some strange reason, managed to get that right between us, which is good. And we're often talking, and it's, as far as I'm concerned, it's a fabulous conversation.
Yeah,
And I think that's really testament to the fact that when you know your stuff, you don't need to practice or rehearse. It's just in there.
But also, it's only at this point you don't, because I've also been rehearsing and practicing for 15 years now.
Yeah, of course.
So
yeah. But it was the same in your football career as well, though, right?
Yeah, absolutely. It wasn't like every single week in training I was practicing I didn't do shooting every single day. I didn't do dribbling you just do little bits across the week to get you prepared for the weekend. But I think whenever it comes to the speaking, what happened with me, and again, this is maybe a little sort of a peek behind the curtains of being a professional speaker. What happened with me was I felt that I really needed to nail, polish, and really master one speech. So for me to be able to do that, I was all around performance. And I thought performance for me was the subject that I felt most comfortable talking about. And I felt it was similar to that. It's almost like a footballing career, the trajectory where, as I mentioned earlier, just for me to walk in the Premier League dressing room, you have to be at, one of the highest levels of performance already. But then, of course, you play for whatever 10, 12 years, and suddenly you're playing 200-300 games, and then you kind of move from this, you're a performer, and you almost morph into more of a leader within the team. So I felt the performance was a natural evolution for me to talk about leadership. But then being in a team background and being part of a football team for 20 years, I thought then the teamwork is really, really key, because it's not just about being a professional footballer, but think about in the corporate world, performers and the performance demands on every single person, especially at those seniors levels, are equally demanding. And then, of course, how many leaders get promoted into a leadership position, not because they're great leaders, just because they're good at doing their job with no leadership training. And then you're thinking, right, okay, maybe as being a leader, that's another element we need to understand. And of course, these organizations, they're not doing it by themselves. They're all constantly coming together as teams, mini teams, as opposed to the silos that lots of people used to work in. So I feel like those three subjects for me are probably the best way to link everything back to the corporate world and how any senior executive, middle manager, or graduate just starting out can apply
It's
to their life.
I'm not just saying this because it's you, but that's the perfect combination, really. If you think about it, linking professional sport and business together, that is a really appetizing combination. Folks, I want to briefly interrupt this show to share a word from our sponsor. Sales Cadence, my sales training and coaching company, provides the investment that brings this show to you, and I want to share something with you that I think you might find useful. You see, all of my clients who invest in my sales training and coaching get access to a whole variety of really helpful sales content. And one of the things that tends to get asked for more than most is how do you ask really insightful questions during discovery and qualification. You see, time spent here positively challenging and inspiring buyers tends to lead ultimately to the events that lead to a sale. And I want to share with you 75 of the right questions to ask your prospect with you. It's my gift to you for being a listener to the podcast. So look, if you'd like to receive the 75 right questions to ask, the ones that will reassure, create impact, inspire growth, avoid the things that get deals hijacked, and create seamless transition towards a close, simply connect with me on LinkedIn and then direct message me with the word RIGHT, RIGHT, and they're yours. Now back to the episode. It's want to go back to one thing, and it won't happen often, if rarely at all. But you mentioned there when you came off the stage and you felt on the odd occasion it was a 7.5 or an 8 out of 10, didn't quite land. Are you able to feel that as you're talking? Is it happening in real time, or is it when you get out afterwards? What is it how does that work?
So ironically, it's the exact same as professional football because you get immediate real-time feedback, and it's probably slightly different. You might get it if you're in pitching for business, where you might get a feeling, but you might not get the answer that this is not what they had or they didn't want what you were offering further down the line.
Yeah.
In football, we got it instantly, from crowds. If you're in front of 30, 40, 50,000 people, you do one bad pass, there's instant feedback. And if it's not from the crowd, it's from your teammate. If it's not from your teammate, it's from the coach. So I've kind of been used to this. So I suppose what I didn't realize as well is that I never thought I was particularly competitive. And honestly, I didn't. I just thought I love playing football and we'll do it. And, winning league titles and winning cups, etc. I just didn't think that was me. I thought there was lots of more aggressive people. I just wanted to go and play football and score some goals. But the other element of what really kind of set me up for what I do now is it's the performance. I always thought that I wasn't a performer. I'd always like to stay back of the crowd and let someone else take center of attention. And now it's just like whenever you're on stage, it's the single biggest buzz I get in my professional.
It's a drug, right?
It's so amazing to be able to go and also humbling. Like, talk about humility. One of the things that I've kind of really adopted and I think's really helped me, no matter who I'm in speaking with, Matt, wherever I do it, is my philosophy when I walk into a room is I'm the least important person in this room. And whenever I have that as a affirmation, a mantra, whatever you want to call it, a belief, I walk in knowing that because I'm the least important person, it's about what can I share with people and how can I bring them into my world, that they're interested, that they want to learn. And then if they do want to learn, how can I take them on this roller coaster of a journey and take them all the way to the end and almost like get them off and they're like, it's like that, what just happened there? And that's the goal every single time I stand up to speak.
And that's the salesman in you as well, because that's exactly what good salespeople should do, which is it's never about me, it's always about them.
Yeah.
What's the challenge or objective? What are they trying to aspire to be? What do they want to get out at the end of this? If you've got that mindset, which clearly you have, you can nail it. You absolutely nail it. A couple of other things just on the practical. I'm conscious of time here, so I might rattle through these if you don't mind.
Yep, go for it.
Ever had a really good tech failure?
Loads. I think from doing it for
one you can remember.
Well, for doing it for 15 years, I think it's every single possible thing that can go wrong. Well, I'll give an example. Last year, I spoke in America, in Philadelphia, at one of these massive conferences where if you've been in America at any of these conventions, so it's a huge convention center, So on the ground floor of where you walk in, and then everything is underneath, all these huge rooms. So I'm on stage, giving it the full ticket, as they say in Belfast. I'm throwing the kitchen sink at this audience, about 200 people, and then the lights went out.
Completely.
Matt,
And you're in a basement.
we're in the basement. There's no natural light coming in. The lights have gone out. The PowerPoint stopped working. The only thing that carried on working was the microphone. But of course, what can you do?
How did you style that out?
Well, because you're at this point where I'm like, I felt like I'd seen it all. Clearly, I hadn't, because the lights had never gone out of me. But I'm literally on stage, standing there. I'm literally on stage, standing there, and the only thing that I could do was, well, this is awkward. So, and then you just try and make a joke out of it, because it's not me. It's not me that's the issue. It's not me that's actually trying to, resolve the problem. I think everybody experiences the tech issues, but ultimately it was hilarious, and I absolutely couldn't stop laughing the whole way through it until the lights just magically came on again, and it was funny.
Amazing. And do you plan in advance that there's going to be a problem? And do you ever, in seriousness, do you ever have any backup or?
No. I think I bring so much tech with me, from extra leads, extra plugs, that all that kind of stuff. But
yeah,
just some things are just out of your control.
And I suspect you do use the odd slide in your presentation, because you'll be bringing images to life for people.
Always using slides. Always using slides, because I feel like those photographs that can really highlight a story or talk about something, then that makes all the difference. But actually, I think that probably goes back to the very start of, whenever you're a keynote speaker, when you're a professional, you should be able to deliver your entire session with no slides, nothing to be able to go off, because ultimately it's back to you knowing your story.
Ultimately, what was the final reaction? Did the lights come back on? Or?
Yeah, and
it did.
Because it came back on within a couple of minutes, and because I sort of not styled it out, but because I made a joke out of it, because it was all out of our control, then ultimately it was we all carried on, got to the end of the session.
If we use that as the kind of the disaster scenario, and then if I flip that and I say, Paul, what's the most memorable for all of the positive reasons? What was the most memorable keynote you've given? Or one of them?
Yeah. Listen, I think it's probably really recently, where I just came back from Saudi Arabia, and I was speaking for the Ministry of Tourism. So when you have an organization like the Saudi Arabian Ministry of Tourism with 100 of their most senior leaders, there was royalty in the audience. There was, just some of the most successful people in the country, because essentially the entire country of Saudi Arabia is being set up as a tourist destination. So you've got the brightest minds, the most successful people, one of the biggest organizations, and for me to deliver a session for them in this brand new resort that they'd opened, which they've been working on for like the last 5 to 10 years, I was so nervous before it. And I don't think that I actually used to get nervous before different sessions, but there's occasionally when you're doing like a bigger one that you're like, a lot is riding on this. And I was absolutely delighted whenever I walked away. And it's generally the cases at the end of the session, how people come up to you and sort of give you the feedback. But actually for me, someone comes straight up and went, oh, we've got another event in 2 weeks' time. Can you come back and do another keynote for me?
That's all you want to hear, isn't it?
That's all you want. That is all you want.
Fabulous. So last few minutes that we've got. So here's me. Got a bit of a backstory, in so much as spent a long time in sales. Not expecting to stand on a stage in Vegas. I know my limitations, Paul. And that's not imposter syndrome.
Okay.
But I haven't played 300 games in the Premier League like you have. So 3 pieces of advice for someone like me to make 2025 next year the year where I move into the world of professional speaking. What's the 2 or 3 tips you'd say to me, Matt?
So I suppose the first one has to be is, why would people listen to you? I think that's the biggest challenge, that there are so many people out in the world of professional speaking or keynote speaking that, why would they choose you? And I think it's really, really difficult to answer that question. But if I were to answer that question from my perspective, then I'm actually very fortunate, because there's not really anyone else from my background who does what I do. So because I was the first person to come from the Premier League and become a keynote speaker, then in the last 15 years, pretty much no one else does it. So I've got a real USP and a niche And because I have a bit of a sporting background and the mindset piece, that gives me some sort of credibility to go and do it. The second thing is, what's your sales funnel like? Are you doing this where you want to just, I don't know, do a few gigs a year? Are you speaking to a couple of people a month to try and get some gigs? And that's one way of doing it. My way of doing it is there are a team of us, or there's a team of us, and all we do, not 24/7, but let's say 9 to 5, 5 days a week, is work on creating opportunities, delivering outstanding sessions. And then what we haven't mentioned is how we now deliver leadership programs, because of the one-off sessions that we did deliver, we now deliver everything from 9, 12, 18-month leadership programs.
So when you say team, is that the team you were talking about that's supporting you as an administration function, or are you talking about a team of like-minded speakers like you?
Yeah, so there's two sides. One is the team of people who work with us to create the opportunities and deliver all the business side of it. And then over the last 4 or 5 years, I've built up what I think can only be described as a world-class roster of performers and experts. So that is people like World Cup winners from football, World Cup winners from rugby, Olympic gold medalists, different world champions across sport. But then, of course, because you're doing this in the corporate world, you go into business leaders. So I've used my network of people that I know across the corporate world and said, right, okay, who are the experts in their field? So you have global CEOs, you'll have, chief financial officers, you'll have experts in D&I, whatever it is that you want to deliver. And then I'm really, really fascinated by the military and military background. So having people who have, first fighter jet pilot, the first female helicopter pilot, would just agreed with a general from the US Army, US Navy. It's just incredible, the team of people, as well as academics who are, the brightest minds studying all these latest subjects, as well as just incredible people who've done things like climbed Everest or rode the Atlantic, etc. So the team we have is so broad, but ultimately I want to build the number one leadership program in the world, and I think that no one else offers what we do because of the variety of world class performers we have.
That's fantastic. Doesn't help me in the slightest, but
but
but I
it's
love.
both, but it's both because it
No,
helps
it is
me understand the team gets the first gig and then how it evolves into anything else.
100%. And actually, forgive me for being facetious. I didn't
No,
mean to,
no,
but
no.
the second point is a very valid one, which is pipeline. I love that.
Yeah,
I love that because that basically says, well, how much do you want it? And if you do want it, how are you going to go about doing it? It's all
yeah,
about the numbers
yeah.
and the activity and all the behaviors. Okay.
And the third one I'll
Mm,
just finish off is just knowing your stuff, and absolutely, like, blowing people away when you get the opportunity, as opposed to so many people do this, Matt, whenever they're on stage, they'll just go and they'll deliver a session and they don't have the ability to make people laugh, nearly make them cry, make them laugh, make them cry. And that's ultimately what the variety is of emotional experience that you want to try and create.
you're a funny guy anyway. But did you go out and invest and get help on that side of the things, the humour side of things?
Yeah, definitely. So again, you'll have everything from people writing jokes for you to working with artistic directors who have had the highest level of performance, who are seeing the best performers in the West End and working with
Amazing.
them. So it's like me being a professional footballer and having a strength and conditioning coach, a physio, a sports psychologist, a masseur, a doctor, a head coach. There's such a team around you that you're learning from to ultimately improve what you do, but they can't get onto the pitch for me, but I can learn from them so I can then become a better version of what I do. It's the exact same in the professional speaking world. It just depends whether you have the attitude and mindset. That's how you want to approach it.
Fabulous. Paul, I'll talk to you for hours, mate, but I know you've got a call in 5 minutes' time, so I'm going to absolutely respect that. The usual thing, if people want to know more, I mean, there'll be some people listening to this who do have access to the kind of funds people are going to need these days if they want to listen to you speak on the stage. Um, where's the best place to direct those kind of people?
I think it's always just better to go on LinkedIn. Honestly,
Yeah,
I've found that obviously I have a website which is paulmcveigh.com, but I feel like, especially in the last few years, my LinkedIn seems to be the place that is almost like my community, that people come together, that whenever they're trying to learn from how to be a better leader, how to perform better, how to bring their team together, how to bring people like myself in to deliver sessions for them on a one-off basis or work with their team on a longer term basis. It just seems the LinkedIn for me. So it's obviously just Paul McVeigh, and you can find me on there. But yeah, there's lots of ways, whether it's social media, website, or just simply send me an email to paul@paulmcveigh.com. Either way.
First of all, just so delighted that you come on, and it's been a
Pleasure.
while, and
Pleasure.
the cataclysmic change, which is so predictable with you, because I know back in the day, where it all comes from, and so such a huge shift in identifying where you wanted to go 5.5 years ago, and then effectively getting there. So you've made this big move from sort of dabbling with one or two things and being very, very good at them, and then getting real clear on just sticking with one, which is keynote speaking. So in 5.5 years, you've come to being one of the best keynotes around. In 5.5 years' time, when I get you on episode number 766, what's Paul McVeigh doing in 5 years' time?
Building businesses. I think that's been my evolution, that I didn't realize, like, I was a performer when I was playing football. I didn't realize I was competitive in the last 15 years of working in this corporate world. I didn't realize I was an entrepreneur. So to go from me being self-employed, delivering a few speaking gigs, to now having 3 businesses that are delivered across the world is probably the thing that I'm most excited about now, of growing them. And for my own individual, let's say it's a lifestyle business of me delivering the keynotes, and we're just about to get 6-figure investment into the second business and $500,000 of investment into the third. And I'm sitting here going, how did this happen? Because this is not the plan that I had 5.5 years ago.
Bless you. Good luck to you, mate. Really look forward to seeing what happens next. And thanks ever so much for joining me on the Sales Cadence podcast.
Pleasure, my friend. Thanks for having me.
What a fascinating guy Paul is. I mean, talk about create a unique opportunity for yourself by combining 2 really fascinating worlds together. He is the only person on the planet at the moment that is an ex-Premier League football player and a psychologist. Hats off to Paul for carving out such a fantastic career. And again, if it is 5 years until we meet him again, I'm pretty sure he'll be in a completely different place. Folks, thanks ever so much for your time. Thank you for listening. As I said at the start of the show, if you enjoyed this episode, do me a favour, just share it with somebody in your network who you think might also get some fun and value out of it. I'd be super grateful. That's it. That's the end of the podcast. Thanks very much indeed for listening. Remember the mantra, everybody's in sales. We're all selling something, and whatever it is that you're selling, I wish you continued success, and I look forward to speaking to you again on the next episode of the Sales Cadence podcast.